Welcome to the second part of the Minecraft tutorial. In this part we're going to be finishing up the materials by adding the foliage and also transparent materials like for leaves, for example. So that's what we're going to be covering today. I didn't want to do too much in the last one. As I said, I'm trying to cut these down to shorter. And we'll also take the chance, because making the materials will be rather quick, because it's going to be most likely a copy of the original material we've already made. We'll also go and create the data assets, which we will be using later. So the first thing we need to do is there is now a second pack in the description below in the Google Drive, because I realized that we needed to add some more. So I added some in the previous video, but I also have some extra ones for the foliage now. So they're going to be down in the description. So we're going to go and import those in our assets folder right here. So drag those in. There should be 3 items, 2 textures, and 1 asset. The asset is going to be 2 planes. So let me just go ahead and open it so we can see it here. It's 2 planes, and obviously we can only see it in one direction, but we're going to make the material 2-sided so that we can see it on both sides. So first thing we need to do is we need to modify our materials here so that they actually reflect the pixel art. So meaning we need to change the filter right here in the advanced tab of the texture and put it to nearest. We did this in the last video. This is just repeating the same thing before our newly imported textures. So one thing to note also, if you have closed the project and reopened it since, although now, for instance, the textures, some of them may look blurry again, that's not a problem. As long as you've changed it once, you'll still get the correct textures. Yeah, so if we just duplicate this, set its scale back to 1 by 1 on all axes, and we want to replace with the foliage here, our static mesh. And so it does put it to the side here. We're going to handle that once we start the actual world generation. We'll make it so that it actually appears here, relative at least. So let's start by making the material for this, because the simplest one to do, so we'll just do it very quickly. So back in our material folder, we want to make a new material, m_foliage we'll call it. And in foliage, what we want to do is we want to first go ahead and change our settings at the bottom here. We want to make sure that we're allowing it to be used with an instant static mesh, because that's how all our meshes are going to be constructed later. So we tick that. Then, just to see if this is working correctly, we're going to use a plane, and we want a texture sample, which we're then going to convert into a parameter so we can change it later in a material instance, and we will call it texture. The texture we'll use by default, just that we have it, is, I believe it is called grass. So let's just search for grass, and we're looking for short grass. So there we go. Next, we want to give this a color. So we want to multiply this by a 4 vector, I believe, and plug this into the base color. Or sorry, not a 4, but a 3 vector. And we can promote this to a variable, to a parameter, not a variable, and we'll call this color. And by default we'll just put it to green, because in most cases the foliage will be greenish, so we'll just do that. There we go. And the final bit that we need to do is we need to have the opacity mask, because right now we don't want to see the black background. So to change that, we need to change the type, so the material domain, and we want it to be surface, but the blend mode needs to change. Sorry, we want the blend mode to be masked, so that way we can put an opacity mask. And to make it work correctly, because as you can see, if we just plug it in, we lose some of the texture. So to fix that, we can, I believe floor will do the trick, or no, ceiling I think is what we're looking for here. So we want to seal this, and now we have everything that appears. So that gives us the result we want. Now we have an actual proper mask for it, and we can test this out immediately. If we go back into Overworld and we select our foliage material and attach it here, we get our nice grass. But there's one problem, we don't see behind. So to fix that, we need to go and make sure it is 2-sided. That way we can see it no matter which direction we're looking at it from. And if we go back in here, we can see it from both sides now. So that will do it for the foliage. Next, we can go ahead and we're going to duplicate our basic material. and we're going to make a few changes to it. So let's close this, and we will duplicate block, and we will call it m_transparent. What it will be is it will be any kind of material that has potentially holes in it. So we have most of this that we'll be keeping because most of it remains consistent. We're just going to make one assumption. So if you are making this and you want to make it a bit differently, that's fine. But we're going to assume that front, back, and all the textures are identical. So we're going to rename them simply to texture. And that's going to be what we're going to do for all of them. So that way they all use the same material here instead of having multiple materials, because it's not particularly necessary for this situation, unless, as I mentioned, you would like it to be different. So we're just going through and changing the parameter names here, all so that they're the same. And so if we apply, we might get an issue or not. We're just going to change one of these and it should modify all of them. So we're going to get the, I believe, leaves it is called. There we go. So we put leaves and it changes all of them now. So obviously with this we can also remove our color, because we're only going to have one color here. So we'll just remove all of them. This, make sure you obviously keep the texture part that's needed and the scales. There we go, same thing here. And we'll be doing this for all of them. So this one as well, the top and the bottom. And there we go. So now with this we have a black and white thing. So we're gonna have to do now, give it its transparency. So just like before, one thing we can do first is we want it to be two-sided, so we can actually see inside. Second, we want to change it to masked. And now we can actually apply an opacity mask. So what we'll do for this is we're going to use this because we already have our texture that kind of acts like a mask. So what we'll do is we will then seal this value like we did with the previous one. Plug this into opacity mask. Now we get our mask properly done, but we still have a problem with the color. So to fix the color, we want to multiply this here. And we want to hold down 3 and click to get a color. And we'll convert this to a parameter, which will be our color. And by default, we'll also leave it in green just so we can see. Now, I'm not sure why we have an issue here. Yeah, okay. So the reason we were facing an issue is because of the multiply. I believe it had like some very, very small values because of how floats work. And so it was considering that there was a tiny bit of white there. So it was appearing in the mask even though it shouldn't. So we're just going to use pretty much one of the textures. And that should work normally for all of them, I believe. So we'll have to try this out once we scale something. So we'll go and give it a try right now. So that does it for this material as well. So not too difficult, it's rather short, pretty much redoing what we already did. So now let's just see if it works with the scale, because the scale might be an issue. So if we go and drag this here, and we are going to change the material to the one we just made, so we can just select right here. Now, so it doesn't seem to cause any issues. You can just check by scaling it further. So it doesn't seem to actually be stretching the material as it should, because normally it should look the same no matter how we stretch it. So let's see. So that's how it should look, and if we duplicate it, that's how it should look as well. But for some reason when we scale it, that's not exactly what's happening. And I think the issue is the mask, so we're just gonna have to figure out why that is. What we can do for this is we're going to make a different version of this right here. So this time we want to keep our lerp at 0. And what we'll use, we will use the top texture for the top alpha. So top alpha. And I want to add this time the bot alpha, because normally the top texture and bottom texture should be identical. We're going to say if the, at least as far as the scale goes, if it is top or bottom, then we want to use this. And we want to do the same thing here with another lerp. But we'll be using the left this time. So we'll get the right texture. And we'll do the same trick, but with the left and right here. So left alpha and right alpha. There we go, and we plug these two in, and we'll do the same thing one last time, but this time with the, I believe, front and back. So this time front texture. Plug it in, and we want front alpha and back alpha. There we go. And so now if we try and plug this into ceiling, it should... Okay, so it doesn't work. So that is not a solution then. Let's just try this alone. Yeah, so that works, but only for one direction. So I believe what we'll have to do then is we're going to keep the top alpha. We're going to do these one by one, but for each of them. So we'll just move this out of the way here, and we'll then call it the opacity mask right here. So we want to keep our top texture here. Make sure this is 0 this time. By the way, I forgot to make sure I mentioned that, but make sure it's 0. Here we want the right alpha, and we're just going to do this for all of them, instead of cutting corners like I originally wanted to. There we go. And we'll just duplicate this. We'll do bot alpha and bot texture. Plug these two in. A bit more space. And the same thing with the right now. So copy again, plug it into A. We want right alpha, no, not right alpha, left alpha, sorry. Left alpha, left texture. And plug this in here. And the final one we need is this, which is going to be back alpha and back texture. And this should be the mask. If we then add our seal, I believe, yeah, we're going to go named reroute. And we're going to call this our opacity mask. There we go. So we did the ceiling there. We don't need to have it here. And we'll call our opacity mask. And I hope this works when we scale it. Let's see. I believe that worked. I think that's exactly the result we should be expecting. Let's just duplicate this one to the side and see if it's about the same. And it does look about identical here. So let's see if we scale it up. Same thing, they all seem to be aligned. The main thing you want to check for here is that it's not stretching when you have it not equal in dimensions. Here we have 3, 4, and 2. If like that it works, and it will work for 2 and 2, it will work for 3 and 3, whatever value you put in, it will work. And so it seems to be doing good right now. So with this, we have all our materials now. We shouldn't need to change anything. I'm still hesitant about how I'm going to set up the damaging, because I believe I have a better way to do it now, which might require us to redo the materials a bit later. But I'm still deciding what to do there. So for now, we're going to stick with this. And so next, we're going to make the data assets, that each time we don't have to redo our materials. Every time we try and make a new one, a new item, we just do our data asset once, tell it which materials or tell it which textures it will use in its material part we're going to make, and then it will build it from there, so we won't have to touch it. So let's get into it. So as with any data asset or any kind of thing at all, we want to make a new folder called data assets. Go, and in the data assets we are going to make another folder which we'll call base class, and there's going to be 3 of these. First one is going to be a blueprint class. Obviously, so we're making a data asset. We're going to look for primary data asset. So this one right here. This one you can't select. This one you can, but I want to make sure we choose the primary data asset, not asset label. Select it, and we're going to call this DA base. And DA base is going to be very simple. It's just going to be the name of the item. That's all. So we're going to have a text, compile, and save. This is just going to be kind of if you want to have any common denominators, common information It's just kind of the base parent class. And just to make sure we don't use it, what we can do is in our class settings, we can go into advanced and say it is an abstract class, meaning that although it exists, although we can modify it here, we can't actually create anything with it directly. So that means that we have to create a child so that we can actually use it. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Right click, create child blueprint class, and this is going to be, we'll call DA blocks. Like this, there we go. So DA blocks is going to be anything we want to do with the typical block. We're separating pretty much foliage and blocks. Blocks include also this. This also counts as a block, but it's just that we'll add a tick to say, is it foliage? Is it transparent? And if it is, well, we'll do the material differently. So one thing I actually did forget inside of our base here, we do actually need a function, and that function is going to be called SetMaterialParameters. And the reason we do it here is so that we can call our functions or save our functions as DA base, and that way we can call this function from it, and it will be able to execute in both in a different way. So what we need is we need one input, and that input is going to be a dynamic material. So dynamic material instance. This is what we're looking for. Make sure you put object reference, and we need to make sure this is passed by, because if it's not passed by, it doesn't actually work here. Or at least it does, but it's a bit more complicated. So for now, we just want to give it a name, which is going to be material in, but we don't want to do anything here. This is going to be the base class, doesn't do anything. It's just that we can call the function from here. So in here, we'll get to override it, but we'll get to that in a second. So first with our DA blocks, we'll make some variables. The main one being we want to have is transparent. By default, it will be false. And if we want to check it to true, we can. Then we want another variable, and this is going to be our textures. And so for the textures, we're going to do two things. We want it to be a map with a name, and it's going to need a structure. And that structure we're going to make in a second right here. The structure is going to serve the purpose of pretty much just making it more readable. So we're just going to create a new folder called structure. And within it, we will make our, I believe it is in blueprints, our structure right here. And we'll call this ST texture info. And inside of it, we want two things. We want a texture. Oh no, sorry. First, we want a color. We want to start off with a linear color. So right here. And the next thing we want is we want the texture that we're going to use. The texture we can actually have texture 2D, but we want to make sure we use a soft object reference because we're going to be using this only in the DA blocks or DA base or DA foliage. So meaning it doesn't need to be a hard reference because it doesn't need to be loaded initially. So we only want to actually load it once it's necessary. With that structure made, we now want to go back to our DA blocks. We can close this, don't need it. And in our textures, we want to modify our type to a map, and we'll change this to our ST texture info. There we go. So what this will look like is we'll be able to give it a name, and in the name it has a color and a texture. And that way that name is going to be a reference to the material inputs right here. So back, bot, front, left, and top, etc. To do that, we want to now override our actual SetMaterialParameters. So we can get rid of our parent because it doesn't do anything. The return node will just move here for now, and we can get started. So first what we want to do is we'll make the distinction between whether it is transparent or not. If it isn't transparent, we're going to go through the keys. If it is, so it is transparent, we don't need to actually use all the textures, we'll just get the first one. So to get the first one, we need the values. So the values will go right here. And instead of going through a for each loop, we will simply say get a copy, and we're going to get value 0. Want to keep it above just so it's more readable. Split this, and with our texture here, because it's not loaded, we need to tell it to load that texture. And so now that we have it loaded, we need to check what it is. So cast to 2D texture. Now we know what it is. And now with our color And we also have our material here. So this is the material instance that we actually just create outside. So for now, we don't have it in a situation where I can really explain it. But once we set this up with our blocks, once we start spawning our blocks, etc., because that's going to be done via instance static meshes, each block will have to go through this process once it's created the first time. And so we'll create a dynamic material instance and we'll pass it through here and we'll update it inside of our D8 blocks pretty much. So with this loaded, we can now get our material in. So it'll be at the bottom here. And say set texture parameter value. And the parameter value will simply be based on this. We will say foliage, I believe is what, oh no. I think we just call it texture. So this is obviously going to be related to our transparent here. And we called it, I believe, texture. So it's just texture. So that's what will be called right here. And that's going to be the value. The other thing we need to do is with our color, we're going to tell our material set vector parameter value. And it's the second one. Plug in here. The name is color. And the value is going to be the override color that we made right here. Just add a reround node, just so it's more readable. Now is the more difficult one, the one where we actually need to go through this loop. So if it isn't transparent, that means we need to use the top, bottom, left, right, front, and back. So in that case, there's a few ways we can do this. The easiest way to go is we're going to go and set them up here first. So we're going to put default values. And so the default values will be top, then we will have bot, then we will have front, then we'll have back, then right, and then left. And so these are the names that we're going to plug into this pretty much, that are based on these names right here. So what we'll do is we will get these, but instead of this time the values, we want to get the keys, or keys, there we go, not get, just keys. And we'll run a for each loop. And we will perform pretty much the exact same logic as this. We just need to first get this value by saying find. And so with the find, as long as we do find it, which in most cases we will, there shouldn't be an issue, we want to split this. And then we can just pretty much copy all of this information, plug it in here, and the asset is going to be our texture, and our color will just be dragged right into there. So just line these up with Q. Now, one other thing though, is here, this time we need to actually put our names. So right here, we're going to reroute the name. We're going to plug it into texture, or the parameter name, sorry. But for this, for our color, it's not the same. For color, we actually need to add the word color to it. So that's why they're named like this. So if you haven't done that, that's why we name them something similar. So now we need to turn this into this plus color, but you can't do that with a name type. So we just need to convert this to a string first. And once it's in a string, we can simply use the append node, and we'll just append color and just convert it back by dragging it in. So that'll do it for the D8 block. So to give you an idea, if we go ahead now in our data assets and we right click. So in miscellaneous, we have data assets, select it. And as I mentioned before, we only have D8 blocks because we don't have access to them because it's a abstract class. So we select it and we'll make this one be, we'll have this one be our grass. So grass right here. Or we'll call it grass block, so it's clear. Because we are going to have our short grass after. So it is not transparent. Its name is grass block. And for the textures, we don't need to change. Oh, actually one thing we do want to do is by default our structure. If we go and open that up, we do want the colors by default to be white. And the reason for that is very simple, is because if it's black, it will show nothing. Whereas if it's white, it just won't influence the thing that is already there. So pretty much it's the default colors that we already have. There we go. So save, and so now normally if we go and refresh this, or we might need to delete it and recreate it very quickly, so we'll just delete that, right click again, and we're looking for miscellaneous, we're looking for data asset, blocks, select, and this is grass block. There we go. And it is still, oh no, sorry, that's my bad. It's because in here it's still black, so I'm just gonna have to go and modify these very quickly. There we go. So that should fix our issue here. Yeah, so now they're all white correctly. So we can just re-put our name, grass block. And for top, we want to get grass top, and I'm just gonna go and copy the color we already had by default because it was pretty good, so I want to actually keep that. So we'll just go and open our M block and get that color. So right here, I'm just going to copy the hex and just plug it in right here. There we go. And so for the rest of them, we just need to say for bottom, it needs to be dirt. And for all the other ones, it's just grass. And we can just go ahead and close this, copy it, and paste it on all the other ones below. There we go. Before we finish up, we still have one last thing to do. We need to do the same thing here, but for our actual foliage. So to make things simple, we'll just duplicate our DA blocks, and this time will be DA foliage. Double click to open it, and this time we won't have to bother with all this. We're just going to make a simple function. So no, sorry, not a simple function, but we just want to save the texture pretty much. So we'll just delete everything else. We just want a texture, and that texture is going to be a st texture info because we still want to have the option of changing color. So we're going to get some errors obviously because we're not using it, but we just need to simply double click it, remove the bottom line, remove the branch, and instead of using that, instead of this, we just want to get this, split the structure, so our texture, drag the texture node here to here, and the color to there. Now we have the same thing, we just need to plug this at the beginning, and it is done. So I'll do the material setup for our actual foliage items. So just to finish off, we will now create a actual short grass foliage this time. So once again, now miscellaneous, data assets, we're going to get our foliage, and this is just, we'll call it short grass. So we will get our grass right here, short grass, and once again, we'll just use the same color as before. We didn't copy it, so it's fine. We'll just put some green. There we go, a bit darker. There we go. And so that will do it for our data assets. We can just very quickly, so just to show kind of the process we'll go through next time, we're going to make a very quick actor that'll set this up, even though we won't be using it now or later. We'll just make it for an example. So blueprints, just so that you get to see the results of what we've done in this part. So a blueprint class, an actor, very basic, a testing, and we'll open it. What we want in this is we want a reference to our data assets, and we want to make sure this is visible, so that once we place it in the world, we can select it. And we're looking for DA base. And make sure you use the base and not the actual block or foliage, because we want to be able to switch between the two. So now one thing, normally what we're going to be doing in the final version is we're going to have separate foliage and separate block, because they use different actual static meshes, and we haven't saved the static meshes as part of our data asset. So, but for here, for keeping it simple, we're just going to add our cube, so static mesh right here. We're going to add the IMP cube, it's the one that we want to use. And for the material, what we'll do is on begin play, or we can do this on construct, that way we actually get to see it in real time. We'll get our data asset. We will say material parameters. And so the material in, what we want to do is we want to say for our static mesh, we want to say create dynamic material instance. And so this is where we kind of would need two different things, because when we create our dynamic material instance, we can't actually do that in the data asset. So we have to tell it what we're using. So here, the base class we're using for this is our block. We want to use the MI block. And so then we want to plug this in here. And so by default, we do have to put an actual thing here, or it won't work. But normally, if we now go ahead and drag our testing here, by default, it's going to be the MI base one, which if we check our material here, that's what it is. It's a bedrock block. But if we select a data asset, so let's say our grass block, it'll swap to the one that we need. And if we scale it, it all works the same, no problem. If we go up, same thing, it stacks up 3 blocks. And so now if we do swap it to short grass, it won't work very well because it's not the right material instance. So that won't work. But this is the result we'll be getting. And we'll be doing this with a instance static mesh approach later. So that does it for this part. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the third part. For the third part, it'll be a bit better. We're going to be working on actually building the surface with our noise finally, because we haven't talked about that yet, about the plugin that I made you install. We'll be using that in the third part. So I will see you then. Hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.